Hey there, I'm Sarah Zarella, a portrait and wedding photographer and your host for Wedding Secrets Unveiled. This is a podcast where we cut through the complexity of wedding planning, leaving you with everything you need to know directly from the industry experts. If you want to simplify your wedding planning while having fun, of course, you came to the right place. Join me while I guide you through your planning, starting from your engagement to your big day when you say, I do. After photographing for over 20 years, I am sharing with you tips and tricks to cut through the excess noise. Because I believe from the moment you said yes, your planning experience should be a magical time in your life. Here you'll find episodes that are fun, stress-free, and straight to the point with a fresh, honest take on the reality of what you really need to know about planning your perfect day. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Wedding Secrets Unveiled podcast, friends. I'm your host, Sarah Zarella, and today we have Julie Comfort. She is the owner of the Experiential Wedding. Also, too, before I get into what today's episode's about, just a reminder, we are on YouTube now, which you can check out at Sarah Zarella Photography, and Zarella is 2 R's, 2 L's. So if you would like to view us talking versus listening, we are now on YouTube. But with that said, may I digress? I was going to let you know about today's episode. So today, I am speaking to Julie, and we're going to talk about a topic that we haven't talked about before. And it's talking about giving your guest a more of an intentional or more of an experience attending your wedding. So a lot of times when you are planning a wedding, people want to be unique or they want to create this experience for their guest, but they really don't know how to go about doing that. So Julie is going to really talk to you about creating an elevated, non-cookie cutter event or wedding for your guests and with intention and purpose. So if you are a listener that wants to be just a little bit more unique in your intention of planning your wedding, this is the podcast episode for you. Well, welcome back to Wedding Secrets Unveiled podcast, friends. I'm your host, Sarah Zarella, and I am joined today with Julie. Hello, Julie.
Hi, Sarah.
How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. Well, I'm excited to just kind of get into this, as this is a topic we haven't covered yet. We've had quite a bit of professional industry leaders like yourself on who are in the industry sort of like you, but don't, let's say, excel, or not excel, maybe like you have a very niche. There's a niche which you do that not many people do. So I guess I'm keeping a secret here. So let's just tell people what it is. What do you do and who do you serve? And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So my name is Julie Comfort, and I am an experience designer. And I have a business called the Experiential Wedding, where I offer experience design services both for couples who are planning their weddings, and also I do consulting and experience design for wedding planners. I also teach experience design both in the event industry to event planners, and I also teach experience design in the corporate world. And I do a lot of freelance experience design outside of the wedding industry as well.
Who do you serve? Is it in what region? Is it worldwide?
Worldwide, yeah. So my services are it's completely online what I do. I have a lot of DIY resources for couples. If they want to kind of take a pass at doing their own experience design, I can walk them through what that means, how to come up with their own ideas for helping the group gel, helping people come together, making connections between people who have never met before, and also just making their weddings more personal, more authentic to them, and more meaningful. And I also offer like full service experience design. So I can completely design the experience for couples and the experience design starts at the moment people first hear about the wedding. So building anticipation, building excitement. How do you get people to know that this is going to be an event that they definitely don't want to miss out on? How do we communicate that? How do we build up that excitement? So I can, from the very first moment people hear about it, it's already part of the experience design. And I could do this full service experience design for couples, and I can do it from anywhere. We usually, there's a questionnaire couples get, and then we have a call where we talk about everything. We go over what emotions it is they want to trigger in their guests. And I know nowadays guest experience is really one of the top priorities of couples planning their weddings. So that's really what I help with. And I can do it from anywhere. I can serve couples anywhere. It's mostly done online. And I have a team that I work with. We kind of collaborate in our studio. I'm based in Berlin, but again, I can work with couples all over. I would say most of my clients are actually in the US. And yeah, so there's kind of two ways to work with me. There's full service experience design and DIY resources where I can walk couples through doing it themselves.
And we'll pretty much go into this on this podcast too, the two different ways that people can work with you and exactly what you do. So let's just take it right from the top. Explain to me and to our listeners a little bit about what it really means to be a wedding experience designer versus a traditional planner.
Okay, so probably the easiest way to explain it is that there are actually three types of sort of pleasurable experiences that you can have in life. There's aesthetic pleasure, which of course is mostly what traditional wedding planners do. That's, how everything looks, how everything tastes. An example of a pleasurable aesthetic or sensory experience is like a really delicious meal. And you get the pleasure from the senses. And then another type is emotional experiences. So to kind of continue from that example, that might be a really delicious meal that's prepared by your grandmother that takes you back to your childhood, and it brings up these kind of feelings of nostalgia and warmth and things like that. And then the last type of pleasurable experience is meaningful experiences. And to kind of take the example one step further, maybe that's you find this family recipe after your grandmother's passed on, and you prepare it for your whole family, and bring together people in this gathering, and then that creates this kind of meaningful moment of connection and togetherness with the whole family. And that might be a meaningful experience. So what traditional wedding planners focus on is the aesthetic side of experience. I mean, wedding planners are experience designers, but they're kind of focused in this one realm. And what I do is focus on the other two realms, emotions and meaning. And basically, it's a really simple kind of framework that I use, but it starts with how do we want people to feel at each stage of the process, as the guests are coming through the wedding experience. How do we want them to feel when they first arrive? We want them to feel special. We want them to feel welcomed. So then how do we create an experience that will make them feel that way? I mean, of course, it can be as simple as having a welcome drink, or it can be the couple greets every person personally as they get there. But it's really about starting with the emotions and the meaning that you want to create and kind of working backwards. And so I design these sort of moments, rituals, experiences throughout the entire wedding experience, starting from the first moment they hear about it, building up that anticipation. Nowadays, a lot of weddings are multiple day affairs, or there's other events leading up to the wedding, engagement parties, showers, things like that. All of that can be built in. How are we kind of creating a connecting thread from the first moment people hear about it all the way through until months afterward, when they are getting the thank you notes in the mail, or they're getting some kind of memento, whether that be digital, whether it be tangible, that ties them back to the experience and reminds them of how it felt to be there. And that kind of prolongs the experience as well. So that entire timeline is covered in experience design. And what I do is, just create moments throughout that experience to kind of trigger these different emotions. And in the end, it kind of all flows together to create this overall experience that people come away with, like a sense of meaning. And the couple also comes away with a feeling of like, okay, it really served its purpose of like creating this transitional moment in our lives. I mean, it's really, the special thing about weddings is that it's maybe one of the only times in your entire life where you get to have all of these people from all of these different places in your life come together in one place to sort of celebrate you. And it is obviously a very big transitional moment in life. It's a big milestone, but you're transitioning from like the single life to, building this new family, creating this new unit, and being held in that kind of transition. And so, of course, naturally it is meaningful, but experience design can make it really meaningful for everyone there, that they play a part in it and they really feel their part in what's transpiring. And it just, it creates more depth and meaning for everybody.
As you were talking, it's funny because you just ended with what I was thinking. It's like it creates depth and meaning. I was thinking, so basically you're taking a quote unquote cookie cutter event and making it a very personalized event. So, a little bit more with the meaningful and the depth, and then people can walk away with just being like, oh, that was definitely put on by so and so and so and so, if that makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah. And also, I think you want them to walk away with this feeling of like, I'm so glad I was there. Like, it means so much to me that I got to be a part of this. And as a guest, that it wasn't just like another party for them. Because before I was an experience designer, I was a wedding photographer for 10 years. I've been to a lot of weddings. And there was definitely a time where I felt like, okay, these are all starting to feel a little bit the same. And I just thought that was so interesting because the people were so different. And yet they were kind of producing these very similar events. They were following this blueprint and kind of they started to feel very similar. And I just really felt like there was a missed opportunity for making it really personal and really about this particular group of people coming together. Because I think a lot of wedding advice is like, oh, you're the couple getting married, it's all about you. But I totally disagree with that. And maybe this is an unpopular opinion, but I think it should be about everybody. It should be about everybody that's there. And it should really feel like a collective moment that everybody is taking part of. It really is a communal experience.
You actually just answered my next question, which is, and I'm sure maybe there's more to it, but it was I was wondering what made you, right, like go into this niche market because, and you just actually just said something that was like resonated with myself. And for our listeners, hopefully you kind of cue in of this because this is kind of an inside scoop here, which is, you were a wedding photographer, so you were doing events all the time, if not every weekend, at least every other weekend. And each couple is extremely different. And you have different family members and different groups of friends. And like you said, though, the actual events themselves were becoming extremely similar. And that resonates for myself because I've been doing this for 25 years, right? And what keeps me going is that each couple I work with is so different. And my experience with them is extremely different. So, but if you're right, if you take the day, I would say at least 50%, the day is somewhat similar. Does that make sense? Like, and yes, there's little aspects here and there. And sometimes, I guess what I'm trying to say is when I walk away from an event, not my experience with the couple, because remember, I'm working with the couple before and after, but the actual event, which is what the guests experience, right? It's very rare that I say, wow, that was different. That was a different energy. Usually the energy is just positive and fun and happy, and that's great, and that's what everybody wants. But I'm talking about there's something, it's a very rare moment where I'm like, huh, and I put that in the back of my mind. I'm like, that stood out to me. And so with that said, it's interesting that you brought that up because what I experience and what the guest experience, because everybody has a different relationship with this couple, is different. But when you come to that actual day, you're right. A lot of times it's very similar.
Yeah, and I think a lot of couples think, oh, if the details are personal, then the wedding will feel very personal. And I think there's maybe an over focus on the details. But actually, in the grand scheme of things, I think people don't really remember the details as much as we hope they do because we put so much attention into them. And so I think it needs to kind of go a little bit deeper than, just your color scheme or the font you have on your printed goods as a way of expressing your personalities and who you are as a couple. And I felt like there was a missed opportunity in weddings to personalize them more than just personalizing the details.
Because you're right. Because people put a lot of effort into these little details that are significant and important to them and maybe to some couple, some guest. And like maybe they may remember it, maybe they won't. But like you said, they definitely remember how they felt that day. Like overall, like every guest is going to take away something different. Like some guests might remember the music, some guests might remember the food, some guests might remember your cake topper. We're not saying that they won't. It's just, but every guest is going to walk away with being like the overall, like how they felt at your wedding that day. So with that said, take me a little bit about like how the inside process, like how do you start this? Like, so obviously our listeners are listening and they're like, all right, this is kind of cool. I want to do this. So how would someone even begin this process with yourself or on their own?
Mm-hmm. Great question. So in my design process, the first thing I do is I actually have a questionnaire, and the questions really try to get at the heart of what does this wedding mean to you? Because of course it's to get married. The purpose of a wedding is to get married and to be kind of witnessed in that with your community. But I kind of challenge couples to go a little bit deeper. Like, what does this really mean to you? Why is it important to have a wedding? Why is it important to do it with these people in this moment? And a lot of times couples have a particular place where they want to get married. Why in this place? And I actually have a Substack article that kind of breaks down the kind of key questions if people want to go through them themselves. But it really just gets to the heart of like, what does this mean to you? Who are the people that are really integral to this moment in your lives that sort of need to be a part of it? And, you know, who are you as a couple? And what are you about as a couple? And how can this wedding feel like an extension of that? And so it really starts with like kind of digging into like, what is this really about? Like, because it's not just about getting married. If it was just about getting married, you could go to City Hall and be married in 20 minutes. There's a reason that couples want to have a wedding. And it goes beyond just wanting to throw a big party, because let's be honest, weddings are a huge investment of both time and money. And in order to not come away with it with this like regret of like, oh my God, was it worth it? Like it really needs to, we need to be clear about what need it's meeting for us and make sure that it kind of rises up to that level. And then from there, I ask like what feelings they want people to feel at each stage. And this is also a challenge to go a little bit deeper, because normally if you ask couples like, how do you want people to feel at your wedding? You think, I want them to feel great. I want them to feel happy. I want it to be fun. But we can go much deeper than that. You know, do you want them to feel alive? Do you want them to feel connected? Do you want them to feel nostalgic or warmth? And really get into the details of how you want people to feel throughout the process. How do you want them to feel when they first hear about it? How do you want them to feel 10 years later when they're remembering it? And then you can kind of shape the experience based on that. But that's kind of what it comes down to, is starting with the feelings and being specific about it, because good is not I mean, if you give people good food and free booze, they'll feel good. But like, is that enough? Is that enough out of this like kind of huge life event? I would argue that it's not.
I love where you're going with this, because like as I'm listening to you, and I hope our listeners are going down this path too in their brain, and maybe it's a lot, maybe we are opening up their eyes to this path, right, by doing this podcast, but also too, like coming from somebody literally who does this for a living and this is my life. It's what I struggle, and I don't want to say the word struggle, maybe I'm at a loss of a better word, but it's what I think about a lot at an event. And it's mostly the reception portion. Obviously the getting ready and the ceremony, like these thought processes don't come through my brain too much, because I mean, you are more in the moment, because you are dealing with like the actual wedding, the actual ceremony. And that is unique no matter what, because it's someone else's vows and everything. It's more the party portion. And I start to think like there's so many people out there that are on the fence of like, do they want to have a wedding celebration? Do they not? Do they want it like, because you're right, it is a financial investment, but I'm starting to see that the trend is really lending more towards the bigger weddings again, right? Like we just went through a phase where we had smaller weddings, because I think people realize that like, what do? We like in this life, like we work, right, to make money, but what do we spend the money on? We do not take it when we pass. We take it with experiences. And there's only so many life experiences that you can get everybody that you love in one room. And your wedding is probably the only one. Like where you can get both you and your partners favorite people in one room. So like that is like checkmate. Like you have to do that. But where I was going with this is I always think a lot like it's interesting, like what is going on? Like why is every wedding right now, and I'm so sorry for the listeners out there that have this, and please just know that maybe I think this because I've been to weddings every weekend, your guests might not, but like why does everybody have the greenery wall right now? Or why does everybody have the telephone that you can leave a message for? Like what I'm trying to say is as wedding professionals, we see trends, but what's interesting is they're all happening at one moment. So they're getting it somewhere, and I would assume it's Pinterest or something. So talk to me about getting these people away from those boards or what they see at a friend's wedding.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting point, but actually, I just want to say something else really quickly that I thought about while you were talking, which is that people take for granted, and this is another mistake that I see a lot of couples make, and I'm sure you've noticed this as well. But people take for granted that if we get everyone we love in one place, and everyone I love, and everyone that my partner loves in one place, that people are just going to intermingle and everyone's going to love each other. But that's not what happens. And I'm sure you've seen this time and time again. What actually happens is people stick with the people they already know. And weddings can feel quite cliquish, especially for people coming in who don't know a lot of people. You know, if you have a work colleague coming in that doesn't know your college friends, who doesn't know your family, it can be very cliquish, and people tend to gravitate toward the people that they already know. And so in order to get people to interact, particularly at the reception, we have to help them a little bit. And that's another big part of what I do. It's building in ways to help people connect. And if it's done well, it can be quite invisible and seamless. But without help, people will not interact with each other. They will just stick to who they know.
And also, too, we foster that because obviously we sit people together that know each other and we do things.
Exactly.
But you know what's funny, though, too, and this is maybe a little off topic, but like I have a photo booth lounge part of my business. And a lot of times when people are on the fence of booking it or not, I tell people, and it's not because I literally, this is my business. I have this business because I saw it be successful. Having that element of entertainment at a reception, I find tends to bring groups of people together more than that don't. Because obviously you have the DJ, you have the dancing, you have the food. People are going to dance, people are going to eat, people are going to go outside and fresh air. But like having that photo lounge, photo booth, I noticed that you start to bring people together more and interact together. But you know what we're going to do, Julie, is let's take a quick break, right? Okay. And when we come back, let's talk a little bit about like how do we get people away from the cookie cutter, for lack of better terms, okay?
Great.
I appreciate you being here. And hey, if you like what you're hearing, I encourage you to check out our website at sarahzarella.com. And don't forget, you can actually subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening so you never miss an episode. And I would so appreciate if you left a fabulous review on Apple Podcast. Even better, share it with a friend. It's a great way to show your support. And now, let's get back to the episode. Well, welcome back to Wedding Secrets Unveiled podcast, friends. So before the break, we were talking, Julia, exactly what you do, and it's very unique, and it's such a niche market. But let's get into it now about how we can implement this now. So how can our viewers bring meaning to their events and not be so cookie cutter?
Yeah. So first of all, I think anytime you're looking at a trend and you think, oh, that's really cool, you should really be asking yourselves, like, is this really relevant to us? Is this us? Because I think especially with Pinterest nowadays, it is so easy to get caught up in all of the details and all of the exciting things that you can do at weddings. And there really are so many cool things. I've seen a lot of great things. But it should feel really personally relevant. And if it's not, just skip it. No one will miss it. No one will miss the floral wall, the greenery wall if you don't have that. It should feel like this is so us. And so that kind of goes back to sort of asking these questions of like, who are we as a couple? And like, what are we really about? I mean, if you're two book nerds, then like your wedding should reflect that. You know, there should be books in the gift bags, like your favorite books or something. You know, there should be personal details that tie back to who you are as a couple. And so we talked a little bit about kind of at receptions, ways to sort of get people to interact like beyond their table, beyond the people they know. One thing I did for a wedding recently that was really fun was there were these kind of little lounge areas. So this wedding actually hasn't happened yet, so it kind of falls on the planner to implement this. But there's going to be these little lounge areas, and on the table in the center of these areas are going to be these stones, and this ties back to the location where the wedding is. And underneath each one is a sort of personal question, a personal conversation question that can kind of get the conversation going. And it's an object that kind of invites people to interact with it. Will walk up to it, be curious about it. What is this? What do we do here? And so they have to kind of work together, and it kind of creates this organic icebreaker of what's happening here. This is something I've never seen before. What do we do? And as they interact with it, they kind of figure out like, oh, okay, here's a question. And then they start talking. And I've done a lot of things like this at events that I've designed for. And if you can kind of spark that curiosity, spark that teamwork, get people to kind of figure something out together, it creates this organic icebreaker that really gives something people to talk about. It sort of eliminates that friction, that awkwardness of like, who are you? How do you know the couple? And, these sort of small talk questions that only get you so far. And then you're kind of like, okay, now what?
And not a lot of people are extroverts, so are going to say those things too. And then people just
Exactly.
feel uncomfortable, and it puts them in a uncomfortable position. I was also going to say too that when you were talking about those questions, two things came to my mind. One was when you said like really figure out like your authentic self, right? So like I had a couple maybe about a year ago. Dan and I photographed their wedding, and they were not drinkers, okay, and they played a lot of games. That was like a big in there, and I want to almost I want to almost say that's how they met too, was gaming, right? So what they did is they fostered an experience like that for their guest, and so they had a lot of games out at their cocktail hour, and so guests were that was their party, and games are interacting, and it was amazing. Like I have to say, like how I talked about earlier in the show, like weddings, I walk away and I'm like, that was one in my brain that I'm like, that was interesting, and that was personable, and I'm not saying that that's for everybody, but that's what you're kind of talking about. And it's interesting because I also see the other side of the pendulum, and I think this is important to talk about a little bit too. And I would love for you to share with our listeners some unique stuff, but also too, we should talk about a little bit about how to not let the pendulum switch. You can go to weddings and you feel like there is a reason why there's traditions. There is a reason why certain things happen at certain times, and I think a lot of people listening or in general might think, oh, I want to do something different and personalized. And then they actually try to reinvent something that works. So there's a reason why, for example, I'm just saying, like, there's a reason why you introduce yourself before you sit down for dinner. Like there's a whole other thing happening, which is like the back of the kitchen and execution, and there's logistics things. And like when you start to try to mess with some things that are work and don't fix them if they're not broken, or like, for example, like if you ever gone to an event, you're like, wow, this was just overly planned, or this was just too much, or anyway, I'm rambling, but my point is there is a reason why certain things work in execution with tradition, if that makes sense. And you don't want to like overly try to change things too.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And that's what I tell people. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to like completely break the mold of the format because, yeah, there are definitely things that work. And not only that, people come to weddings with certain expectations. And if you don't meet those expectations, people will be really confused.
Yes.
And like at my first wedding, I wanted to do like a cocktail hour thing instead of a sit down dinner. And the planner at the venue said, well, people will expect a dinner, so they won't eat enough. And so that was a really good point. So yeah, like you said, there's a reason that things are done a certain way. You do not have to reinvent the wheel. You can just do kind of small intentional interventions that have a big impact. And anytime you do something outside the box, it also has to be really clearly communicated what's going to happen, because otherwise, again, people will be confused. People have certain expectations of what a wedding is. But I think there's a lot of opportunity because there is that expectation to kind of break out of the mold here and there and you don't have to completely reinvent what a wedding is. And I don't necessarily think that's what people should be trying to do. But within the format, how can we still make it ours? And I can give another example from my own wedding. Actually, my husband and I, we really bonded over books and literature and poetry. So at our cocktail hour, on the cocktail tables, we had these little magnetic boards with, I don't know if you've ever seen, they were really big in like the early 2000s, those magnetic poetry sets that people used to have on their refrigerators. So we had those on these little magnetic boards, and people could kind of make poems, and it was kind of a fun activity. It was something for people to do, so they didn't have to have awkward small talk. And in I mentioned earlier, kind of creating a connecting thread as a thank you, we actually made little poetry books where we photographed the poems that people made, and we made like little books of poetry of the magnetic poems. And I mean, to be fair, some of them were really dirty and silly and goofy, but it was kind of a cute, fun thing. And we put some pictures from the wedding with the poems, and then listed all the wedding guests as the writers on the title page. And it kind of tied back to that moment, and hopefully gave them like a little feeling of nostalgia for having been at the wedding. But again, it kind of removed some of that friction that happens at the cocktail hour when you want people to engage with one another and not just talk to the people that they came with. I can give you one other example from my wedding of something that we did that was personal, but also with the intention of helping people connect. So we had kind of three days of events. We had a barbecue on the first night, the wedding the next day, and then a beach day on the third day. And on the first night, everybody got another guest's name kind of randomly, sort of like Secret Santa style. And by the end of the 3-day weekend, they had to dedicate a song to that person that they felt was like fitting to that person. And so they had to get to know that person a little bit. But because it was sort of a secret, you didn't want to be obvious about the fact that you were getting to know this person. So you kind of had to get to know everybody because you didn't want to give away that you were digging into one person's kind of story. And I was actually amazed at how seriously people took this. They really got into it. They really wanted to do a good job and pick a really good song for their person. And then in the end, like everyone, we had these little cards that they wrote the song on. We gave it to everyone. And then we also sent the playlist of all the songs to all of the guests. We had a WhatsApp group for all of the guests, and we sent it in there. So everyone got a playlist of all the songs. And like it just created this kind of funny moment of connection where you had a moment of connection with two people, the person that you were giving a song to and the person that you received a song from. And in almost all the cases, it was people that there was one couple that they got each other, but other than that, it was mostly like people who didn't know each other, and it just kind of created this really special moment of connection. So I think that's a good example of kind of what experience design is. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's just a small thing, but it was done with intention. And I think people will, remember it as something a little bit different that they've never experienced at a wedding before.
And I'm sure too, like in your forms, whether you work with a couple or they hire you on the do-it-yourself process, you have questions that they can ask people, which they could find on your website. And what I'll do is for the show notes, I'll connect all your information for our listeners, so that way they know these steps and these questions that they can start asking themselves to create this journey for themselves of creating a journey for their guest.
Yeah.
What are some of the cookie cutter traps that you find that couples are falling into? And also too, I would love your advice about how people can get themselves out of that.
Yeah. Well, think the number one thing that I see is the feeling that people have to have a wedding party, because I think that not everyone is cut out to be in a wedding party. I think it takes a certain type of person who would make a really good maid of honor or best man, for example. And those are roles that not everyone is good at and not everyone wants to fulfill, but there's a lot of pressure to fulfill them. And so that's sometimes I just see people who just seem so out of their element having to kind of fulfill this role. And I think that's one area where people should be more intentional about how we involve people in the process. I do think it's really important to bring people into the process, and I do like the sentiment behind having a wedding party. saying you're important to me. I want you to be a part of this. But I think we should be more deliberate in how we do that and really be thinking, how could this particular individual really contribute in a way that's meaningful for them? You know, if you have a particularly creative friend, asking that person to help with, you know, maybe the more creative aspects, design or flowers, whatever, that is more meaningful to them than if you're asking like your most introverted friend who might be your best friend and you really want them to participate to give a toast at the wedding. That might be an absolute nightmare for some people, but you don't want to exclude them from that just because of that. And so I think with things like that, we're just kind of blindly sort of following this idea of like, okay, we need to pick our most important people and they all need to fulfill this kind of standard role. And we should be thinking more intently about it. How can we really play to their strengths or at least not put them in a position that's uncomfortable for them? And you know, and that can also extend beyond like just who you might have in your wedding party. How can we involve people in a way that would be meaningful to them? You know, if you have somebody that's really into music, asking their advice about what kind of music you should play, you know, could be really meaningful to them. People actually want to help. They want to contribute. It's meaningful for people to participate, but they want to do it in a way that's like unique to them and that they can utilize their strengths and their interests and not in sort of a generic way that's, you know, kind of one size fits all.
Yeah, I think, like you said, like in general, humans want to help, right? Like, you know, think about like your everyday
Mm-hmm.
interactions with people. Like, let's say you're talking to a friend and you're like, oh, I got to do this, this, and this, and this. There's always this common thing, like, let me know what I could do to help. Like, you know, like, let me know what I could do to
Mm-hmm.
help. Like, I'm not just about weddings, like in everyday life, right? Like how many times
Yep.
you vent to somebody or just say like, oh, I gotta do this, or, you know, and you just get a reaction of like, let me know what I could do to help. Like people want to help, they're looking for direction to help. So I think like your takeaway is like giving them that direction. Like you see an area where they can help. You know, before we get into our wrap up question, because I feel like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we could talk about this all day, but we gave people a really good
Mm-hmm.
insight to what you do. And if they want to continue this conversation, obviously we would love for them to reach out to you. But in overall, right? What do you see the most joyful couples have in common?
I think really involving people in the process, not treating their guests like a passive audience and really bringing them in some way, whether that's involving them in some ritual or, like we just talked about, having them contribute in some way, but really making the guests feel that they are an integral part of what's transpiring. Like this couldn't happen without you. Those are weddings that I've come away with like the best vibe of like, oh my God, like I like this could have only happened in this moment and I was a part of it and that feels amazing. And so I think it really just comes down to like intention and exclusivity. It's really bringing people into the experience.
I love it. And so, Julie, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you in the hot seat before we wrap up.
Hmm.
What's your wedding hot take?
I mean, I've been to 300 weddings, and I would say 99% of them were completely forgettable. And the ones that really stuck to my bones that I still remember now were the ones where it really felt like you had to be there and the couple made everyone present feel like this couldn't have happened without you. Like you are what makes this wedding what it is. And it just was just a complete um, like loving embrace as an experience. And I feel like so many couples miss the opportunity to really do that. And they don't see their wedding, they see their wedding all about themselves and not about an act of generosity for the people who are there. And that's sort of the shift I'm trying to make with my work is view your wedding as a gift to the people who are there. And just that shift alone, I think, makes weddings so much better.
I love it. That's a great hot take and a great wrap up. But I am going to put you for one final question, and that's our wrap up question that I ask every guest. What are some key points that couples should be asking their planners or their in your case, like, actually, I don't even know anybody who does what you do. So they just need to call you. You're the one and only. But what can people be asking? Like, give me like 3 bullet points that people can be asking an individual to make sure that they are going to be able to create this elevated experience for their event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say the most important thing is you do not have to design every single moment of a wedding. There are kind of 2 key moments that will have the biggest impact. Sort of a peak moment, or what I call a defining moment. So you have something during the wedding that's completely out of the ordinary, that's outside the box, one moment that sort of brings everybody together. I call it a moment of collective awe. It can be anything, but it should be unique to you. And then the ending, end on a high note, end in a really special way that makes everybody like leave with just the best feeling. I don't think it's a good idea to kind of let weddings peter out, because the way that we remember events is not a collection of every single moment, but usually the peak and the end. And so I would say focus on those 2 things. As long as like you nail those 2 moments, everything else can be exactly the same as every other wedding. It will still really resonate with people and still really feel like kind of a once in a lifetime sort of event.
I love it. And that's what we're trying to do for all of our listeners, is really help you with the tools to create a once in a lifetime event. And I think that's what everybody wants to create, is a once in a lifetime event. Well, I want to thank you, Julie, for joining me on this week's episode of Wedding Secrets Unveiled. You helped all of our listeners become one step closer to a stress-free wedding planning journey. Can you tell everybody where they could find you?
Yeah, so my website is theexperientialwedding.com, and that's my handle on Instagram and Threads as well. And I have a Substack called Designed for Connection. So it's designedforconnection.substack.com. And I share a lot of insight and articles about all this different stuff and getting into the psychology of experience design and everything if people are interested in that, but also just tips on how to DIY it. So.
I love it. And also, too, for our listeners, make sure that you tune into our YouTube channel, which is Sarah Zarella Photography. Zarella spelled with 2 R's, 2 L's, and that way you can see us live talking. Well, not live, but we've recorded this episode, so you can watch this episode if you are listening, but you could actually watch Julie talk and myself and any other episodes that we have. And also, too, for our listeners, I'll have Julie's information on our episode show notes, which you can find on which you can find on our podcast page, which is at sarahzarella.com/podcast. So thank you so much again for listening. Thank you for listening to Wedding Secrets Unveiled. I appreciate you being here. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode, I want to tell you something. I encourage you to check out our website at sarahzarella.com. We love photographing while having fun, of course. Check out our podcast page on our website for our show notes, along with upcoming episodes with your local wedding experts. Listen in as we help you plan your epic event. And don't forget that you can actually subscribe to this podcast wherever you are listening, so you never miss an episode. I would so appreciate if you left a review for us on Apple Podcasts. Even better, share it with a friend. It's a great way to show your support, and let us know what you think. If you know any wedding experts that would like to be a guest, we have a link directly on our website where they can let us know. Thank you for listening.